Are yarn advents really worth it? Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, Karchermakes here, and today let's talk about yarn advents. But before we get into that, I just want to say this is being filmed on April 26th. Tomorrow is Saturday, April 27th, which is local yarn store day. So if you have a chance, if you have the privilege, if you have the opportunity, go support your local yarn store. A lot of yarn stores have specials running for local yarn store day. And I do know that there are some designers such as Karchermakes who have designs, patterns, especially for local yarn store day. And I do know Karchermakes typically has a free pattern where if you buy the yarn at the yarn store, you get the pattern for free, which is great and a great way to support that local economy. So what I'm wearing here is last year's local yarn store day Karchermakes pattern, and this is called Citation, and this is made out of 2 skeins of Jersey Cat yarn. I have the labels here. One is called Zombie Skin, it's the green, and then the blue is called Roll for Initiative, and this is a 75-25 fingering weight base, and it is quite lovely. So I personally love it. I love how this turned out, and hopefully, I haven't seen Karchermakes pattern for this year yet, but hopefully it's equally as beautiful. Okay, now let's talk about yarn advents. 'Tis the season for the yarn advents to be going on sale, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but the dyers normally put them on sale early to be able to take pre-orders and then ship them later, closer to December, when you can open them. So first things first, what you get out of an advent set really depends on the dyer. And I would encourage you to go look at their socials, go look at their websites where they post their yarn for sale, and see what the listing says, because there is no standard and it really varies depending on the dyer. So it can vary in yarn weight. Some dyers do fingering weight, some dyers do DK weight, some dyers do both. It can vary in put up, which is how much yarn comes to a skein. So some dyers do 10 grams, some dyers do 20 grams, and in a couple cases, some dyers are now doing 50-gram half skeins. And I have a couple here to show you really quickly, just so you can see some examples of this. So this is from an advent from 2020 from Bumblebee Acres Farm, and this is a 10-gram put up. This is just 10 grams of yarn. There were 24 of them, I believe, in the set. And this happens to be Corriedale and nylon. The fiber is going to vary as well. Again, take a look at the listing and see what it is. This one happens to be a 20-gram put up on 75-25 superwash merino nylon from, you know, if you're new here, I love Rising Tide Fiber Company. If you're an OG, you know, but this is a 20-gram put up. I would say this is probably the most common put up, is a 20-gram put up. And then, you know, some come labeled, as you could see here. They have nice little labels on them. And then sometimes they don't. Like, these are not labeled. I happen to know these are Fangirl fibers, but some don't come with labels. She did include a card that had the listing of the colorway names, but not all of them label them. And then in a unique example, which is probably, I feel like this is the only one that I've seen that does this, Polka Dot Creek has a collaborative advent set where there's a bunch of dyers that kind of coordinate together to dye up the minis, and then they all get shipped at once. So this one happened to be 25 Canadian dyers, and here's some of those. So of course these are all going to look different because different labels. Some again had like little string labels, whatever, but they're going to be different because they're from different dyers. But this was all packaged together as one advent set. So really what you're getting in this set, again, is going to vary depending upon the dyer and what they choose to do and how it comes packaged, whether there's extras, no extras, whether they're labeled, whether they're not, how big of a skein you're going to get, how many skeins you get. Some do 24, some do 25. That's all going to vary. So read the listing. And if you have any questions, reach out to the dyer. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer questions. So the next part of the yarn advents, and I think that this is really the piece that entices me the most with yarn advent sets, is you kind of have to like surprises. If you don't like surprises, you can probably just stop watching this video now, because a yarn advent set, a countdown set, is not going to be for you. You have no idea what you're going to get. Yes, they do sometimes include, like I said, a mood board or a theme, and I can put some examples here. But in terms of what you're actually getting, it's completely unknown. Completely. You might get speckles, you might get tonals, you might get solids, variegateds, or you might get a mix of all of those things. It might come as a fade, so just, you know, a color fade going from one color slowly making its way into another. It might be a gradient. It might be just 25 total random skeins. Again, really look at the listing and reach out to the dyer if you have questions, because, you know, you don't want to set an expectation for yourself and then be disappointed when the yarn advent comes. So let's talk about the good, all the good things yarn advents bring. And for me, it's just the fact that it's a lot of small quantities of yarn and a lot of color variety. Now, that to say, I do know of at least one dyer who last year did an entire advent based on the color pink, and it was fantastic, and I was kind of sad I didn't get it once I saw it opened. But for the most part, you're going to get a lot of color variety. Secondly is, you know, you just get something to look forward to each day, and that's really fun for me. I like having that sort of anticipation to not know what's coming and then to be surprised. Again, you gotta like surprises. It's a really good way to build stash without buying full skeins. And if you're into color work, mosaic, stranded knitting, any sort of like color work type knitting, these are great ways to get just small little quantities that you can incorporate into your projects without having to commit to doing a big project that looks kind of scrappy from all the colors. So speaking of that, there's a lot of designers that do patterns specifically intended for advents. Now, that's not to say you can't make it without an advent. Obviously you can. Of course you can. But like Amber O'Brien, Helen Stewart, they really have succeeded in coming up with patterns that really lend themselves to the unknown element that an advent brings. And because of the way they design and some of their designs, it really makes it more cohesive when there's, you know, 25 different crazy colors, and it kind of pulls it all together in the design itself. So now that we talked about the good, we got to talk about the bad too. And just like I started the good with, hey, you get lots of yarn, the bad is, hey, you get lots of yarn. It has potential for overwhelm, has potential for hoarding. If you're somebody who's a slow knitter like myself, Exhibit A, it's going to pile up. And, you know, you have to be able to either accept that these are going to be stashed for a while, or just understand that, you know, you're going to end up with a lot of yarn. So another thing that's kind of on the bad side, and I say kind of because this is completely subjective to your own situation, but they can be expensive. That said, there is so much labor that goes into making an advent set or countdown set. The amount of time that it takes, not just to dye the yarn, but to wind it up, to label it, to possibly package it if it comes into individual packages, adding extras to it. All of that takes time, and time is money and time ain't cheap. So just kind of understand that. Yes, they are expensive, but the dyers need to be compensated for the amount of work that they're putting into it for you. So I do know that there are some dyers that offer payment plans. That's always a great way to kind of split up the payments on a larger purchase, right? But just kind of keep in mind what your own budget is. Don't let the FOMO get to you, but keep in mind what your own budget is and whether or not you can truly make this purchase without, hurting your own family's personal economy, if you will. I do know, though, speaking of FOMO, that a lot of dyers, some dyers, like they sell out fast, like lickety split, and you got to be on top of the listings. But for the most part, there's also so many that do this now that it gives you the opportunity to maybe look at some lesser known dyers that you're not as familiar with to purchase from. And that's what I did last year with Polka Dot Creek. I had never purchased from them before, and I took a chance and got the Christmas Vacation one, which again was the 25 Canadian dyers, and I was really happy with it at the end of the day. And I still have a few left that I haven't worked with, so those will get added into a project soon. Okay, now a little bit of advice on buying these advents, things that I haven't mentioned already. So for me, and again, obviously this is my opinion, I'm the one making the video, but really understand who you are buying from. And I mean that from a couple different angles. So first and foremost, like purchase from a dyer that you know and you trust, right? Somebody whose aesthetic you're familiar with. So for example, I really like colorful speckled yarns, and I like a lot of variety. So I'm not gonna, necessarily choose an advent from a dyer that only does, like, say, a monochromatic tonal advent. Like, that's not going to be what brings me the most joy. What brings me the most joy is a lot of color and an explosion of craziness. So that's what I prefer. But really kind of get to know your dyer, get to know their style, get to know how they have their own aesthetic with their dyeing, and try to pick something that, really resonates with you and how you like to make. Another thing, and this is a little, I don't want to say controversial because I don't think it's controversial, but it's a little bit of a sore subject, and this is just something that's coming from a place of honesty, and it is slightly related to knowing who you're buying from. Be aware of the dispute timeframes for whatever method you choose to purchase this yarn. And here's what I mean by that. So if for some reason, right, you lay out $300 for a yarn advent, and again, it's still April at this point. If that never ships, if that dyer gets overwhelmed and can't commit to the orders and kind of ghosts you, because of the dispute timelines for various payment methods, you may be out of luck, unfortunately. So I know credit cards require a 60-day written dispute time frame. So if you're ordering something today and it's not supposed to ship until November, you're already outside the window of dispute if something goes awry, right? I know PayPal has 6 months. So me personally, when I purchase yarn advents, I try to use PayPal whenever I can because they have that longer window of purchase dispute timeframes that allows me kind of the security to know that if something really bad happens, and I'm not saying that bad things happen intentionally, like, look, life happens, shit happens. it gives you some protection monetarily on, what could be a very big, expensive purchase. So just kind of be aware of that and know that. Now that we've said all the things that there is to say about yarn advents, do we think they're worth it? Look, as long as you can balance your expense budget with the time that you have to commit to making things with yarn, I think yes. I think they're worth it. There's no secret, again, you OGs know, there's no secret that I love mini skeins, and I love the opportunity of colors that it adds to my stash. So I think it's worth it. I also, I have my own budget, and I do budget for yarn. And if you guys want like a video on how I yarn budget, like just ask in the comments below. But I budget for it, so it's a known expense. It's something I plan for every year, and then, I'm prepared for it. So I think it's worth it. I love all my projects that I've made out of mini skeins, out of advents, and I'll link a video below here for a little review that I did last year of all my mini skeins and advent projects, and maybe you can find something there that inspires you to make. So let's talk about it below in the comments. Do you think it's worth it? Are you going to buy some advents this year? And if you have bought advents before, who have you purchased from? Inspire me below. Let's have a conversation. Let's support some indie dyers. So I hope you found this helpful. This has been a really fun topic to talk about. Again, I just love advents. I love indie dyers. I love working with small quantities of many colors of yarn. And hopefully you do too, and you can be inspired to support some indie dyers and maybe get an advent or 2 or 3. If you found this helpful, give it a like. If you don't mind subscribing, that would be great too. And until next time, happy making.